The city was restless that afternoon, caught between the golden warmth of the sun and the low hum of its own chaos. Narrow streets buzzed with scooters weaving dangerously close to pedestrians, street vendors shouting their prices, and impatient drivers leaning on their horns. The air carried the mixed scent of grilled meat, exhaust fumes, and the salty whisper of the nearby ocean. Lisbon had a way of holding contradictions in its palm: beauty and noise, tradition and modernity, calm and tension. In the middle of that blend, an unknown man wandered with no particular direction. He wasn't dressed in anything remarkable: worn-out sneakers, faded jeans, and a wrinkled t-shirt that had probably once been bright but now looked dull. His face was the kind you might glance at and forget a moment later. Ordinary, unshaven, eyes carrying both emptiness and a flicker of hidden resentment. He wasn't poor enough to draw pity, nor polished enough to draw admiration. He was, in the truest sense, invisible. At least that's how he saw himself, and that invisibility gnawed at him like an unrelenting parasite. Well, life hadn't been kind. He had drifted through jobs that never lasted, apartments he could barely afford, and friendships that dissolved when his bitterness leaked too often into conversation. Every corner he turned seemed to remind him that the world had moved on, leaving him behind. And so, on that day, he sought out small distractions: not joy, not meeting, just something to fill the empty space inside him. He found himself in a quieter part of the city, where old stone walls stood withered by centuries and the roads narrowed into uneven cobblestones. The buzz of traffic faded here, replaced by the distant laughter of children and the occasional bark of a dog. The man slowed his pace, watching as a golden-brown dog trotted happily along the edge of the path, tail wagging like a metronome of joy. The dog wasn't alone. It had slipped away from a gate left ajar, its leash trailing loosely behind it. For a moment the man simply watched. The dog's energy annoyed him. There was something offensive about the purity of its happiness, the way it seemed to live so freely without worry or burden. He felt an irrational urge rise in him, a cocktail of envy and spite. He thought, absurdly, why should this creature feel more alive than Meg? When the dog trotted closer, sniffing the stones and pausing to look up with gentle eyes, the man acted on impulse. His leg swung out sharply, and his worn sneaker connected with the dog's ribs. The sound was quick and muted, followed by a yelp so raw it cut through the quiet street. The dog tumbled sideways, scrambling in confusion, its tail no longer wagging but curled protectively under its body. The man smirked, though the expression held no true satisfaction. It was shallow, fleeting, the kind of grin someone wears when trying to convince themselves they've done something worthwhile. For a second, he almost believed it. He almost believed he had power, that he mattered. But the sound of hurried footsteps broke the illusion. From the other end of the street, a figure emerged, tall, athletic, moving with urgency. His pace was not just fast but purposeful, every stride a statement of strength. He was dressed casually: dark joggers, a fitted shirt, a cap pulled low over his brow, but even in that simplicity, he carried an aura that made passers-by take notice. His eyes locked instantly on the dog, then on the man standing over it. The dog, recognizing safety, whimpered and crawled toward the approaching figure. The man froze, suddenly unsure. There was something familiar about the newcomer, something in the way he carried himself, in the sharpness of his jawline, in the unmistakable precision of his movements. And then it struck him not like a whisper, but like thunder: Cristiano Ronaldo. The name alone carried the weight of stadiums, trophies, and millions of fans around the world. Even in casual clothes, even without the roar of a crowd behind him, the presence was undeniable. He wasn't just a footballer. He was a symbol of discipline, resilience, and global fame. And in that moment, He was also the owner of the dog that had just been kicked. The man's throat went dry. Ronaldo knelt immediately beside the trembling animal, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he stroked its head and checked its body. His expression was carved from steel, his lips pressed tightly, his jaw working with a restrained fury. The dog licked his hand weakly, tail giving a faint wag, as if to reassure him. Then Ronaldo's eyes lifted, pinning the stranger with a stare that could cut through stone. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the dog's shallow whimpers and the distant hum of the city. The man wanted to look away, to disappear into the walls, but he couldn't. Something about that gaze held him there like the weight of millions watching, like a stadium gone quiet before a decisive penalty. "What did you just do?" Ronaldo's voice was low, controlled, but beneath it ran a current of barely contained rage. His Portuguese accent sharpened the words, making them feel heavier, undeniable. The man stuttered, fumbling for an excuse. It was that I didn't mean you kicked my dog." Ronaldo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The certainty in his tone was enough. "For fun." The man opened his mouth, but no words came out. His excuses dried up before they could form. He felt the absurdity of the situation pressing on him. He had kicked a random dog out of boredom, only to discover that it belonged to one of the most famous athletes alive. Fate had cornered him in the cruelest way. A small crowd had begun to gather now, drawn by the tension, by the presence of Ronaldo himself. Phones emerged, lenses glinting as people started recording. The man felt heat crawling up his neck. He wasn't just facing Ronaldo, was about to face the world. Ronaldo rose slowly to his feet, still keeping one hand protectively on the doll. His posture was imposing, his expression unreadable but fierce. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some gasping, others whispering angrily at the sight of the stranger who had dared harm the animal. "Where?" Ronaldo asked simply. The word cut deeper than any accusation. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't embellished. It was just one word, carrying the weight of disappointment, of moral judgment. The man swallowed hard, but his voice barely surfaced. I don't know." Ronaldo shook his head slowly, as if that answer confirmed everything he already suspected. He crouched again, speaking softly to his dog, whose trust and love were still intact despite the pain. The crowd's murmurs turned into open condemnation. Words like cruel, coward, and monster floated through the air, each one latching onto the man's skin like thorns. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, but not in the way he wanted. This was a power, this was exposure, this was shamed. The dog nuzzled into Ronaldo's side, and in that image a loyal creature seeking comfort in a man who embodied strength and compassion. The stranger saw his own emptiness reflected back at him. He realized, perhaps too late, that his small act of cruelty had opened a wound larger than he could have imagined. The crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every second, every angle. The man wanted to vanish, to erase himself from the lens of history before the internet immortalized him as a villain. But Ronaldo wasn't finished. He straightened once more, his gaze unrelenting. "You think it's fun to hurt something weaker than you?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "This dog trusts people. He trusts the world. And you chose to betray that for what?" The man's lips trembled. He had no answer, no justification. Every second that passed tightened the noose of guilt and fear around him. The crowd erupted in shouts, some demanding the police, others urging Ronaldo to take action. Children hid behind their parents, wide-eyed at the scene, while older fans shook their heads in disgust. The man's invisibility, his curse and his refuge for so long, had been ripped away. Now he stood exposed under the glare of Ronaldo's reputation and the crowd's collective judgment, and somewhere in the depth of his chest, something cracked. It wasn't empathy yet, not fully, but it was the realization that his act had given him the control he wanted. It had stripped him of it completely. Ronaldo, sensing the fragility of the moment, didn't lash out physically. He didn't need to. His words, his presence, his reputation, they were weapons sharp enough, and as the man stood trembling, cornered by the weight of his own actions, the story was only beginning. Because Ronaldo wasn't going to let this end here. The commotion swelled as more people gathered, drawn by the sound of Ronaldo's voice and the sight of him standing tall, his dog clinging to his lappy. The stranger stood frozen, his face pale, sweat breaking across his brow. Every glance from the crowd was another knife. Foams hovered in the air like vultures circling prey, their blinking lights recording his disgrace for eternity. Someone shouted, "Call the police." Another voice echoed, "Animal cruelty." The man's heart pounded in his ears, louder than the chows around him. He wanted to run, to melt into the crowd, but every path out seemed blocked by eyes, lenses, and judgment. Ronaldo remained calm on the surface, but there was an intensity radiating from him that made escape impossible. His hand rested gently on the dog's back, steadying the trembling creature. For Ronaldo, this wasn't about fame or even his own pride. It was about principle. He had grown up with nothing, had fought tooth and nail for every ounce of success, and he believed in respect for people, for animals, for life. To see his loyal companion hurt by someone's thoughtless cruelty was a violation he couldn't ignore. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by the crowd. 2 officers stepped forward, separating the stranger from the circle of spectators. They took statements quickly, the murmur of witnesses confirming the act. The man tried to speak, tried to explain, but his words stumbled over each other and collapsed into nothing. It was just, "I didn't mean," but no one listened. No one believed. The officers led him toward their car, but before he disappeared inside, Ronaldo stepped forward. His voice cut through the noise with clarity. "Wait." The officers paused, glancing at him, Ronaldo's gaze fixed on the stranger, sharp but steady. "I'll face the law," he said, his tone firm, "but I want something more." The man's chest tightened. What more could be asked of him? He had already been humiliated, already doomed to be branded by the internet. But Ronaldo wasn't asking for revenge. His next words surprised everyone, even the officers. "He should understand what kindness means," Ronaldo said. "If he thinks hurting is fun, let him learn what it is to heal." The police exchanged looks, but they respected Ronaldo's influence and let him continue. "I want him to work at an animal shelter. Let him clean cages, feed the abandoned, see the loyalty of creatures he doesn't deserve. That will punish him more than prison." The crowd murmured approval. Some cheered softly, others nodded. The officers agreed to note Ronaldo's request and let the justice system decide, but they promised to consider it in their report. The man was escorted away, head bowed, heart burning with shame. The internet erupted within hours. The videos spread across platforms. Stranger kicks Ronaldo's dog. Perseven defends his pet. Cruelty caught on camera. Millions watched, millions condemned, and the man's anonymity vanished overnight. His name was dredged up, his face plastered across headlines. Strangers spat insults online, calling him everything from heartless to worthless. Employers cut ties. Friends stopped answering his calls. His life unraveled. And then came the order. The court, pressured by public outrage and Ronaldo's personal appeal, sentenced him to community service at an animal shelter for 6 months. He resisted at first, bitter and resentful, but he had no choice. The shelter smelled of straw, disinfectant, and the lingering must of fur. Dogs barked in cages, Cats meowed from corners. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency. On his first day, the stranger kept his eyes down, doing the bare minimum, sweeping floors, carrying food, cleaning waste, but the animals, in their strange and simple way, chipped at his defenses. One dog in particular, a thin, scared mutt with sad eyes, watched him constantly. At first, he ignored it, irritated by the attention, but as the days stretched into weeks, he began to notice. The dog never barked, never growled. It simply watched, tail thumping faintly whenever he drew near. Against his will, the man found himself kneeling one day, offering a cautious hand. The dog sniffed it, then licked gently. Something unfamiliar stirred inside him. By the second month, he was feeding them with care. By the third, he was talking softly to them, his voice carrying tenderness he hadn't used in years. By the fourth, he realized he looked forward to the shelter, to the wagging tails that greeted him, to the trust that grew where none had been before. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. For the first time, he felt seen, not as a villain or a failure, but as someone capable of giving, of protecting. He began to understand what Ronaldo had meant, that healing is stronger than hurting, that strength is shown in kindness, not cruelty. When his sentence ended, he chose to stay, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The shelter became his anchor, the animals his companions, the work his redemption. The internment forgot him eventually, as it always does, but he didn't forget the lesson. He carried it, heavy and bright, like a scar that turned into a star. Months later, during a quiet afternoon at the shelter, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and froze. Ronaldo stood there, casual yet unmistakable, his dog trotting happily at his side, healthy, strong, tail wagging. The stranger's throat closed, words stuck. Ronaldo gave a small nod, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "I see you learned." The man lowered his head, shame and gratitude twisting together. I did." Ronaldo crouched, ruffling his dog's fur, then glanced back at the man. "Good. Remember, the world doesn't need more people who hurt. It needs people who care." With that he left, his dog bounding beside him. The man stood silently, watching, until they disappeared. For the first time in his life, he felt not invisible, not worthless, but part of something greater. Story of cruelty turned into compassion, of weakness turned into strength. And though he would never wear Ronaldo's fame or skill, he carried something else. The chance to be better, the chance, finally, to matter.